G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with the penultimate RAAF Coral Sea Catalinas video. And as we're coming up to the second last video, guess what I found? Right down about there in a stack of Aeroplane monthly magazines, which had to come out because I was pursuing the stench of what turned out to be two dead, rotting Antechinus's. And then applying expanding building foam into the holes via which they entered my humble abode. So although I had initially planned on illustrating this video series more or less solely from the photographs appearing within Jack Riddell's book, the fact that I had to move that stack for another reason entirely meant that I had no good reason not to at least look at the table of contents as I went through all the magazines in the stack. Having already gone through that pile of Aeroplane monthlies and that pile of Aeroplane monthlies, all in search of a particular two-page database article which featured a really nice cutaway view of a Catalina showing the positions and operational duties of all the crew, which, you know, I thought that would be good to have at the start of this series. So good that even at this late stage, with an excuse to go through the last, well, not the last because there's more of them under the bed, but a late pile of Aeroplane monthlies, guess what I found? From 13 years ago, a 20-page feature article on Catalinas. So, today's episode of Coral Sea RAAF Catalinas for the 10th of May 1942 shall at least feature some much more betterer pictures and illustrations. The better for you to form a mind's eye view of what a Catalina looks like from more angles than one. See what I mean? This is a 1942 vintage drawing, which, though it shows the blister gunners with a pair of 50 caliber Browning guns, and here it says rear gunner's compartment, pointing to where the two blister gunners stand back to back facing sideways. It shows a bulkhead door into the tail compartment. On the larger drawing there's the door, and it says bulkhead with door into tail compartment. But because it's a 1942 vintage drawing, it doesn't tell you that as well as the lavatory or toilet in there, in the rear compartment, you can just barely see a walkway showing up in the drawing. Rear gunner lays down on that walkway and fires out through a blast tube under the tail. And that is how a Catalina can survive a concerted attack for 1 hour and 37 minutes. Mounted by not one, not two, but from what I can make out, 3 Zero fighters on floats. That is a Royal Australian Air Force Catalina in an early 1942 paint scheme. The reason I say it's early is because there's a red flash on the fin and there's a red dot in the middle of the roundel. We might cover that story after having a look at the aircraft movements for today and after reading a couple of letters from people who were there at the time. And you'll note that there are two kinds of Catalina. There are Catalina PBY-2, which are flying boats, and there are PBY-5 A, which are amphibians. The difference being the retractable wheelie dealies. And the RAAF in 1942 was operating flying boats, which should be the PBY-2 Catalina. But if you have a look at the tail, particularly the rudder line and the profile, that 1942 RAAF PBY-2 Catalina is fairly obviously equipped with a PBY-5 A tail surface rather than that. It even shows up on their Christmas card, as well as on the slipway at Bowen and on the River Cohen. So, even the mighty Aeroplane magazine is not entirely correct 100% of the time, because there were tails like that fitted to the flying boat Cat. Australia had about 18 of them as far as I know, maybe 26. So, today, 79 years ago, according to the unit history sheet and operations record book, Cairns, 10th of May 1942, A2412, Captain Sergeant C.W. Miller, 2nd Pilot Sergeant A. Lunnan, proceeded Cairns to Bowen for overhaul, being airborne at 13:30 hours local, waterborne 16:30 hours local, aircraft damage 92 bullet holes, many under the waterline, and rudder cable nicked by bullet, resulting in their 1 hour 37-minute long running battle from 2 or 3 zeros, which commenced about here. And here we have a bit of a mystery solved. Subsequently, RAAF received consolidated built PBY-5s and PBY-5 As. Most had their undercarriages removed before delivery. The majority, including those ferried as amphibians, were operated as flying boats, and this modification was made permanent on many aircraft, designated PBY-5A(M). As we see here, the PBY-5, cruising speed 110, maximum speed 200 miles an hour. That's going downhill at full throttle. Let's say average combat speed, probably 150 to 180 miles per hour, because you're not going to be diving at full throttle all the time. You're going to be sometimes full throttle straight and level. Most of the time, I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of turning and banking and throttle bending and pulling back on the throttle to slow down suddenly, and yeah, all kinds of stuff's going to go on. These dividers are set for 150 miles an hour. So that's roughly how far they flew while fighting against zeros, trying to get back to Cairns from where they picked up with the zeros. And the zeros from Dobroyn Island, they were already 300 miles from home when they picked up with the Cats. So you can see why a zero that's 300 miles from home, after chasing a Catalina for 225 miles, they're going to want to go home as well. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense of yesterday's operation. So now, once more, to convey the flavour of first-hand accounts, we'll have a look at 3 short letters. Squadron Leader N. Fader, Guinea Airways pre-war pilot, written in 1987, talking about the 15th of May, the 2nd of June. One from Lindsay Rundle, 1987. Second wireless telegrapher on A2417 and A2412. And okay. From John Malign. Doesn't give any details there as to who John Malign is. We'll no doubt figure it out from the letter. Norm Fader is going to talk a lot about Papua New Guinea. Sadly, that's what the Reader's Digest Atlas of the World shows of Papua New Guinea. Apart from that, and the bit that we're interested in is the bit that's up there, because it pretty much gives us that, and it gives us that. Doesn't give us the bit in the middle. Letter from Squadron Leader Norm Fader. My job with the American transports was to guide the lead aircraft at low level to avoid detection into WAU, W-A-U. The strip is on the side of a mountain with a steep gradient at an altitude of 4,000 feet. It must be approached uphill only with engine power and flown fast onto the deck. More power is required to maintain momentum to reach the top of the strip, where the machine is turned at a right angle to prevent rolling backwards. Once committed to landing, it must be completed, as the mountain rises steeply to 12,000 feet. All pilots of the squadrons were briefed to the hazards and the techniques required. Happily, all landings, although perhaps not copybook, were safely accomplished. History tells us how WAU was saved, and the Aussies pushed the Japs back down the Bitoy Valley to Salamander. And as it happens, we have a pencil sketch with watercolour, even showing the American markings on the DC-3, I'm pretty sure that is. I believe casualties could have been extreme had these relative inexperienced pilots no knowledge of the hazards and how to deal with them. That's what he did on the 15th of May. 2nd of June 1942, with the completion of the transport job, I returned to 11 Squadron. I found a Dragon DH-84 lined up for me to go into the interior again in order to bring out crashed or bailed out Yank crews. Did a circuit and landing to get the feel of the old Dragon, and next day set off for WAU. My logbook says leading aircraftsman Hack, Pilot Officer Davis, Private Walston, but I thought there were 4 blokes in the cabin, in addition to a 44-gallon drum of fuel rigged up to the wing tanks through a hand centrifugal pump and designed to give me extra hours in the interior. About an hour out from Moresby and about 7,000 feet prior to crossing the ranges, I decided to test the extra fuel setup. It worked okay because both engines cut. Water was later discovered in the drum as substitute for petrol, taken out by someone short of ration tickets, no doubt. Gave leading aircraftsman Hack a message from Moresby, forced landing St. Joseph's River, instructed all personnel in cabin that on a given signal to move as far up as possible and assume the crash position. That's as far up the back of the aircraft as possible, to move the centre of gravity back. Had chosen an area of high kunai grass on a bank of a river about 50 feet up. I gave the signal. They all must have reacted as one man, for the nose shot up, and with the stabiliser hard forward and the wheel shoved almost through the front dash panel, we cleared the bank and gently stalled into the grass and came to rest. A Catalina stalled landing had nothing on team effort. No damage to aircraft or personnel except a knee injury I sustained from the throttle quadrant. I gather the aircraft joined Jerry Pentland's Independent Air Force later. He was an Australian Flying Corps pilot from World War I who was flying in the New Guinea Highlands during the 1930s. During the war, he stayed on basically rescuing shot down Allied airmen with a higgledy-piggledy ragtag fleet of light civilian aircraft. Somewhere I've got a book about him, unless I've lost it in the moves over the years. Moving on to Lindsay Rundle, second wireless telegrapher, A2417 and A2412. Dear Jack, I am enclosing a couple of copies of my logbook for May 1942. Sorry my log a bit tatty, but unfortunately my book spent some time in the bilge of one of the aircraft, which didn't improve its visual appearance. According to a crew list I have in my logbook, the armourer at May 42 was Lack Johnson, leading aircraftsman. My book shows the crew as Miller, Lunnon as pilots, Sandell, navigator, Lawless, Run and Rundle, wireless telegraphers, Riddle and Dunn, engineers, Johnson, armourer, and Stott, second armourer. Brief memories of May include sighting those ships south of New Guinea and wondering what they were. The shot up our tail from one of them soon reminded us that there was a war on. Heading north from Tulagi the next morning to review some islands whose name evades me, then being told to ensure sufficient fuel to return to Moresby, and apparently just missing the main Jap fleet going to Tulagi. On 9th of May, challenging HMAS Australia and another ship going flat out north to the Coral Sea battle, and then having our lunch interrupted by the Jap float planes, reference to yesterday's operation. On arrival back in Cairns with ambulances waiting, causing the locals to realise the action couldn't be too far away, not to mention the train journey from Bowen to Sydney. Thence to John Maline's letter. 12th of September 1991, Castle Hill. Dear Jack, I enclose my version of the word picture of A2414 flights on May 1, 2 and 3. I also enclose parts of World War II diaries which may flesh out A2414 adventures. You will see that on the night of May 1st and 2nd, 1942, A2414 ex-Tulagi searched for 10 hours all around the New Georgia group before finding the Jap ships at 0422 hours local in position 8 degrees 48.5 minutes south, 158 degrees 17 minutes east, which we shadowed for, it says 1/4. So I'm figuring that's a quarter of an hour before, a quarter of hours, quarter of an hour. Let's say that the S on hours is the wrong bit. For a quarter of an hour before dropping 2 by 250 pound anti-sub bombs. We then turned for Cairns and later diverted to Port Moresby, where we arrived about noon on May the 2nd. Okay, they found the Tulagi invasion fleet. Sincerely, John Maline. Diary extract states, A2414 from Port Moresby on May 1. We did a search back to Tulagi and landed at about 16:30. Okay, now we have dual maps. Port Moresby, Port Moresby. Tulagi, Tulagi. We had intercepted by radio a sighting of Jap ships by Miller in A2417 heading south near Fazy. That being Fazy there, which is sadly off the map as well, off the map that away in the Reader's Digest Atlas, and dot 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 dottity dot 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 dottity dot 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 dottity dot with the legend Tulagi invasion force. Then the panic started. By dark we were off the water again to shadow all night. Searched up and down for some hours along the probable course of the ships, but could see nothing. Then went into Gizo to have a look there, and somebody laid us on the moon and burst a heavy ack shell close underneath us, so we pushed off. About an hour before sunrise, we discovered 2 ships about 100 miles from and heading to Tulagi. Made first sighting report and were ordered to attack. Made an attack through the clouds from 6,000 feet with nil results, then turned to Cairns and within a few minutes discovered 3 more motor vessels. Later were ordered to return to Moresby and arrived there at midday. Okay, now I did think about having a little bit of a chat on how did we lose the red roundel, shown there and there and there. And by Jove, do you know what? You see that little rectangular projection there? They're the doors on the blast tunnel through which the rear gunner fires. Much to the surprise of the enemy fighter, who thinks that by going down below the fuselage they can evade the fire from the 2 blister gunners. There again we see the pre-June 1942 red roundels, whereas there and there and there we see the post-June 1942 blue and white roundels. So how did the change come about? Well, I'll give you a clue. There's the crew of A2417, Captain Mike Seymour, on water at Havana Harbour, Ifate Island, 27th of June 1942, after an attack by a US Wildcat fighter. So after we read tomorrow's episode, we'll have a look at this reappraisal after the Coral Sea battle, with a list of all the aircraft lost, starting the day after the Pearl Harbor attack, continuing over the next page. To round it off, we'll have a look at Tulagi Revisited, which is a fair slab of print, but that takes us up to the 27th of June, after which I will probably declare the Coral Sea coverage to be at a bit of an end for a while. And I'll give Jack Riddell's book a bit of a rest, but I can't see any reason not to continue the coverage as it goes on a survivable monthly level with suitable glimpses telling what they're up to, when and where. February 43, March 43. And we have a picture of a kingfisher. You may recall that during the second week of March, the USS Astoria had lost 5 float planes, 5 Vought Sikorsky Kingfishers. When the American fleet returned to Namur, they asked the RAAF to search for the planes and their crews. After over a week of searching, on the 18th of March, A24-2 came upon 5 float planes on the beach at Rossall Island. Frank Chapman landed in the lagoon to assess the situation. The area where the float planes landed was near the Osborne family house. They'd moved in January, but had left instructions to their employees to assist any airmen who became stranded. The Americans wanted to burn their aircraft and go back to Tulagi on A24-2. The Australians convinced them that a working party could be brought from Moresby to repair the aircraft. The radio men were taken to Tulagi and a working party arrived the next day from Moresby on A24-14. Pilot Officer Keith Belithio and A24-2 arrived from Tulagi at the same time. A24-2 swung out its guns and flew as top cover while A24-14 was on the water. Wilbur Watson and Brian Walters were in charge of the RAAF working party. The Americans taken to Tulagi had run out of cigarettes and coffee. The crew of A24-2 shared theirs, but soon tobacco ran out for everybody. Duties for A24-2 included landings on Rossall Island on 19 and 20th of March with a seaward reconnaissance on the 21st of March. The aircraft was on a dispersal from Tulagi on a daily basis to Guadalcanal each day from 22 to 27 of March. On the 27th of March, A24-2 proceeded to Moresby via Rossall Island, taking back the American float plane radio men from the RAAF base at Gavutu to the float planes. The float planes left Rossall Island on the 28th of March and flew out to the USS Curtis, a PBY servicing ship. The first 4 were taken aboard. The fifth, already badly damaged, was accidentally knocked against the ship's stern, suffering more damage. It was abandoned overboard. So, there you go. Now you know what a Vought Sikorsky Kingfisher looks like. And the Americans got 4 out of the 5 of them back rather than burning the bloody lot. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Here endeth today's video. 10th of May, 79 years after May 1942. Ciao.